or evening or afternoon, depending on your location. Thank you for joining us on episode 54 of the Blowback Roundtable. We are honored again to have special guest return John Steppling from Norway, and Ian Kummer is a special guest from Moscow. We also have Ben Toth in Hungary, Paige, Hungary, and Carlo in Washington, D.C. So thank you all for joining us. Let's start our program just discussing the title is, we called it Navalny and the Space Nukes. That's a throwback to the 80s bands, everybody's favorite synthwave pop band, the Space. No, that's not true.
Does sound good for a band. It does.
It's,
I almost believed you.
Apparently Navalny did somehow not survive. When did he pass away? It was pretty recently, right, guys?
In the last 10 or 12 hours. So
yes.
it's very, very fresh news. It came out from the Russian, prison services, up from there to TASS, to RT, to the Russian media. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, well, I think we should hear from Ian, the Russian perspective of it, because within 11 minutes and 12 minutes, the French, Le Monde magazine and the British Guardian had like multiple page articles about this freedom fighter and the threat of, hugely autocratic Russia that he was supposed to save, democracy from. So I have some headlines and many headlines and many statements from Western leaders lined up. But I want to know, this savior of democracy, the fight against Putin, how was this even, is it perceived in Russia? Ian?
Well, it's one of those, it was kind of surreal because I remember it got out on Russian, on Telegram, like, oh, Navalny died. And then like you said, just a few minutes after that, it hit Western headlines. Now, a lot of people might find that strange, but I think Navalny dying was a preloaded story. He's one of those celebrities that there's already a story written about. Oh, he was he's brutally murdered by the regime or whatever. So they can just change make some, change some details in that template and then click publish. It's happens before. There's been celebrity deaths that didn't actually happen that were accidentally reported because someone clicked publish when that person wasn't actually dead. So that's not unusual.
Very quick. That's
yes.
True. But what about the Russian people? I mean, I have my take on Navalny, but
I think everybody's tired of hearing about him. And, really, because he comes up constantly as all, from external media. Oh, Navalny this, Navalny that. I mean, he's not like a big person in Russia. He's really not. I mean, because he's not a communist. He was never in any danger of being a communist. That is the second biggest party besides United Russia. He's never. I mean, he's a very right-wing guy. He's an extremely right-wing guy.
That's what I thought.
Yes,
it's like a white nationalist or something.
He was all about Crimea rejoining the motherland. So, if you look at the early things he said, they're definitely not in line with Western.
He did
agendas.
In the early 2000s, he was a fascist. I mean, it's easy for me to say because all of his followers did the taxi wave, and it was like
the taxi wave.
How do you stomp out cockroaches, like those disgusting ads?
Right.
And he was talking about Muslims. He was talking about immigrants. That was he was, and then the West basically rebranded him to this liberal superhero. And also, this is nothing but a fact, no conspiracy theories. He got mRNA vaccinated in Germany, and apparently the Russian initial diagnosis is something of the blood clot. Further comment on this one, but yeah, he came back from a walk outside the jail. He collapsed, and the resuscitation was unsuccessful, and that's all we know. There's no forensic investigations or anything like that yet.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, Ben, because I was thinking, I didn't think of it until probably about 10 minutes before the show started, because it was the blood clot. I'm like, well, did he get, that totally safe,
get no
injection that has never caused any negative side effects for anyone ever, that perfectly safe medical procedure. And I wondered if he had that, because it's not a thing that happens often in Russia, because, we have Sputnik here.
Exactly.
But
that's why I added he got in Germany.
Yes, that's interesting. So it's one of those, and there's going to be accusations of what caused it, right? So it's like, oh, was there foul play? Did he just die? I mean, he's at the age where stuff like that happens, and blood clots are major cause of death for, adult males, starting late 40s, 50s, 60s. So it's a thing that he just died. Sometimes people just die. It's a thing that has been known to happen. Sometimes people just die. Spanish Fabs.
Hey, Spanish Fabs, talking about Billy Bob, let's bring something on screen. It's just 6 seconds. There's no speech in it. But if you've lost a loved one, is this like within 10 to 12 hours of his or her death? Is this how you are? I don't even care about the speech, but she's already at the Munich Security Conference giving a speech.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. John, you had prior to going live here, you had an interesting point about how, when they unleash the news so quickly, it's always kind of kind of suspicious. So it reminds me of, and I wasn't alive, but I've heard that, very shortly after JFK was assassinated, they announced it was a lone gunman. He had no connection to any kind of organization, just a lone gunman. And then of course the investigators themselves on the ground were wondering, like, how do they know this? Like, we haven't even started our
that's
investigation.
that's always the tell, in a sense. They can't wait to rush out the cover story. It was true for Sirhan as well. For Martin Luther King. I mean, and obviously 9/11 and everything associated with that. No, what's interesting here to me, because I have not followed Navalny's career particularly, but I know that just acquaintances in Norway, since it happened recently and people make comments, their take is immediately, Putin has killed another opposition leader. Another opposition leader. And I said, what do you know anything about Navalny? And I say this again because I'm hardly an expert on this subject. I said, he was profoundly Islamophobic. He was like a white nationalist. He was a very, very far right-wing guy. And one would think had some kind of connection to the CIA, because they don't let those kind of opportunities go to waste. And he was tailor-made for them. He was reasonably telegenic and whatnot. And so, but mind, this is the Western press makes it sound like he was going to win the next election, that he had massive following, and he had like 2% or something.
1 to 2%. Even after the so-called FSB so-called botched the poisoning, you remember that? That's when he actually became center stage. Before that, he was nobody, and afterwards he's nobody. I love that they do call him opposition leader, which is just Gennady Zyuganov, the Communist Party leader. That is the opposition in Russia, not this guy. But sorry.
Yeah.
For some reason, Putin never actually harms the actual opposition that he has. Like, the actual communist opposition that he has, they're all fine, which is weird. If he's such such an undemocratic thug. But
just as a sidebar remark, and file this under to be taken up later or another day or something, that all the African leaders that rejected the vaccine have died, right?
I've seen a compilation of this. Really scary.
It's very strange. It's a very strange story, and I haven't dug into it yet, but somebody sent me an article on it, and I thought, well, that's reasonably strange. But so I'm just throwing that out there as
we don't want to dwell on this,
but death and
John, you might have seen, if not, I recommend Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, who also had a comment about thank God we got this kind of vaccine and not the other kind. We got it from Russia and Cuba. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
And you want to I do remember back with the Kennedy assassination, a foreign newspaper published his assassination before it occurred because they confused the timeline between the United States and their country. But to go out, I'll go out on a limb, but not a very. I don't think it's very critical. It's interesting to me that Putin has this enormous PR success, 300 million views on the interview with Carlson.
That's just X, and that's just the English interview.
Right.
Margarita Simonyan, the RT editor, says close to 1 billion if you take all the uploads and the translations.
And if you also factor in, there's more than one set of eyes watching the interview. It's much higher. Yeah. And then that this ship is sunk in the Black Sea. That doesn't make any, because people like us are aware that the Ukrainians didn't sink that ship. The CIA and MI6 sank that ship, and their Confederates.
Yeah, there was a global spinning around above the Black Sea again.
So it's a very convenient death because it's taken the attention away from this huge PR success that Putin had. I mean, what he got under people's eyes was the truth about Ukraine and.
Well, I just want to because this came up the other day, and it may have come up on the Aesthetic Resistance podcast. But if you go to the BBC, the New York Times, Slate, the Independent, Washington Post, you can find op-eds about Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin, and they could have been written by the same, chat box, actually. Just adjectives like vile and disgusting were used. This is an utterly innocuous interview in many ways. Putin was articulate and dignified and statesmanlike and charming. Tucker Carlson was Tucker Carlson. But Carlson is an interesting discussion onto himself, but vile and disgusting it was not. And it fascinates me that you have to dig very hard to find the material that the South African case contained against Israel, the incitement to genocide part of that brief contains all these quotes by Israeli politicians and rabbis and settler officials and dignitaries.
Oh, yes, yes.
I read some of them on the podcast the other day because, it's not hard to prove incitement to genocide when you read this stuff. I can dig it up quickly in a few minutes and read a few of them because people find it hard to believe that this was actually what Moshe Feiglin, Yoav Gallant, and Ben Gvir and all these people did.
Oh, yeah.
Astounding stuff. Arabs are like monkeys and should be, driven into the sea. Their children are terrorists and little snakes and should be beheaded like the parents. I have no sympathy for the children or the adults. I want them all dead. These are politicians saying this, not crazy people off the street or something. These are elected officials.
John,
there's not a single word about this in the Western press.
Yeah,
not
it's amazing.
A single word.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Imagine Hezbollah or Hamas, leader saying something like that. Like everybody would hear of it within a minute.
I have to tell you a very quick, short, again, sidebar, parenthetical comment. I have friends in Hollywood who work in television, and the new season is starting. It was delayed because of the strike, and a friend of mine is on this Dick Wolf show. It doesn't matter. And the first episode, a bomb goes off in a Somali restaurant or something, and they're blaming the Somalian terrorist group. So the officials, FBI and Homeland Security, are all huddled together, and the guy goes, "What do we know about these Somalians?" Oh, they're called Abdul something something. The guy goes, I've never heard of them. He goes, yes, they're a horrible, hyper violent terrorist cell, same ideology as Hamas
in Somalia. Yes.
So, yeah, this
Against
is the new screenwriters, just subtly, not so subtly indoctrinating, Americans into, Hamas is the new ISIS.
Yeah,
I don't know if the screenwriters guild has stopped striking. It might just be ChatGPT, but yeah.
Well, if you look at CNN's parent company, Warner Brothers, is owned by a Zionist, and it's come out, and actually this has come out from the CNN's own staff, their own staff members who are upset about this, that they have to go through the special approval process. Basically everything they write, and no, not just basically everything they write has to be approved by the Israeli government before they even publish it. There's a special approval process for.
Yeah. When I worked in Hollywood on TV shows as a staff writer, everything had to be approved by standards and practices. Originally, that meant you couldn't show erect.
Right, but this is the news. This is
the
news.
Then,
it's CNN.
There was Then there was a liaison to the army, to the military official, and then people would come and sit in on story conferences occasionally from the CIA or retired Homeland Security guys. Now, because I'm not there anymore, but I know writers,
it's just Mockingbird media.
Every staff for any show that has to do with the military or the police or spying, espionage, anything, has an official from the CIA or FBI on the staff, sitting in, helping with the writing of the script. So literally, those people are writing Hollywood film and TV now, quite literally.
Well, I want to say to people who might think they're separate, when John says Hollywood, always include big AAA games in that as well, because the way, Call of Duty and all that, you kill the bad Russians, the bad Venezuelans, it has the same fingerprints as any big sort of military.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. And yeah, news and entertainment are the same thing. It's all blurred into this.
The other aspect of our title was about the space nukes, and that's an interesting story. I don't know if we can call that a distraction. What do you guys think about the space nukes? I mean, to me, it seems just like something the evil Russians would do, right? Like, I mean, it just makes sense that if anybody's going to create space nukes and threaten humanity, it's something Putin would do. So,
Larry,
do you guys agree with that? I mean, that's basically, who could argue with that, guys?
Can I? Because this thing, the very terrifying threat in space, it's almost reused, like with the same content from 2018 and 2020. And I watched a short clip from Larry Johnson, former CIA, and said, absolutely, it's scare hype. That's all that it is. But remember, this was when it's not the Senate. What do you guys call it? The House? The other part of
Representatives.
Yeah, yes. They were voting on this big 90-something billion, 60 billion for Ukraine bill. And in the middle of that, it came from some Democratic representative saying big, scary existential threat. And it went everywhere. Like then it soon became nukes in space. Then it became anti-satellite weapons. And it just skittled through the Western media. Be very afraid. And it didn't work. The House went into recess until the end of this month, I think, without Ukraine aid. But that was the second part of, that didn't. I mean, we were heading into the Munich Security Conference, right? And Navalny's dead, and there's space nukes. That's kind of where we got the title. Thoughts on the space nukes, guys?
It's the plot to GoldenEye. You've seen GoldenEye, the James Bond movie.
The propaganda now coming out.
Let's stick with the propaganda. Yeah, go on, John.
Yeah, and no, it has become more strident and sort of desperate feeling. People like John Kirby and all the White House press representatives
they're more cornered, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're snappier and more defensive and
Karine Jean-Pierre sorry, but she walks in
that's her
and
name.
gets 2 negative questions and closes the book and says, "We're done." You know,
Yeah.
she's supposed to. Her job is supposed to answer those questions, and she said no.
But they're unanswerable. I mean, they're actually getting a few real questions now, and but you know, this is everything somehow circles back to Israel right now, because this is the it overlaps with every story that comes up, it seems, and the violence is worse and more horrific than it's possible to invent or imagine. And so the U.S. government seems they have to work harder and harder and harder to bury all these things. You know, images of blindfolded prisoners shot while they were told to run away, the body of the girl on the fence with her legs blown off.
Yes.
Ripped off. It's
another hospital. Where are they? The NASA hospital now.
NASA hospital. Yeah. And there's a really great article by Thierry Masson that I posted a number of places, and it was mentioned in the podcast, Aesthetic Resistance podcast, where he kind of clocks the history of Israeli violence going back to the Ergun and Stern gang, and pre-Nakba, pre-48, that the first wave of Zionists came on. They were already killing people, wholesale violence, and it goes up to the bombing of the King David Hotel and so forth. The point being that it tracks this all the way up to this Rabbi Sharboff, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in '84 for terrorist attacks against Palestinians. And it must have been horrific. I don't remember the details, and I've not looked it up. But he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, Yitzhak Shamir commuted that sentence 5 years, 6 years later, very quietly, and he's now free. So there was this giant conference in Jerusalem, Victory for Israel. It was a big, like, settlers' rights conference, one of those convention center, backslapping, self-congratulatory orgies. And this rabbi, whose life sentence was commuted, Sharboff, I have to look up his exact name, I apologize, got the longest standing ovation of anybody. And Netanyahu was in the audience standing and applauding, and Ben Gvir.
He's still alive? He's still alive, John?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm gonna look it up because I have it here. So
I remember on your Aesthetic Resistance podcast, you had all these very, very inflammatory statements from these religious leaders, from these politicians, and it's just shocking.
Why are you looking?
Yeah, the mainstream media won't touch them with the 10-foot pole.
No.
While you look it up, I can't be precise either, but I saw some officials say that anybody above 4 years of age is like fair game to kill. That's one disturbing fact. And something like 60% of the Israeli public believes that they haven't been forceful enough in Gaza. That's what terrifies me, because that means this is not just the leadership, But go ahead.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find this. Oh my goodness! Probably I can't because I'm terrible.
See you too, Christy.
I'll read you. I'll put on my reading glasses, in fact, and let me just read you a couple of the sentences, the quotes. Rabbi Eli Ben Dahan, who is the deputy minister for religious affairs, said, "A Jew always has a much higher soul than a Gentile, even if he's gay." You don't hear that.
Sounds Talmudic, to be honest.
Rabbi Dov Lior, the chief rabbi of all the settlements, Hebron, others, said Gentile sperm leads to barbaric offspring. But the best one was Ovaida Yosef, who actually has died now. But very recently, he was part of the Shas party. He said, Goyim, non-Jews, were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel. Why are Gentiles needed? They will work, they will plow, they will reap. We will sit like a Fendi and eat. With Gentiles, it will be like any person. They need to die, but God will give them longevity. Why? Imagine the one's donkey would die. They'd lose their money. This is his servant. That's why he gets a long life, to work well for the Jews. It goes on and on.
Definitely Talmudic, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this stuff can't be touched, but
yeah,
it goes on and on and on. I have like 3 pages of these things, these comments. So the point of the Thierry Maison, the reason I brought it up is that it makes very clear this was the sensibility from the start of Zionism. It was a violent, force-based colonial enterprise from the beginning. Ben-Gurion made no bones about it. We will have to use aggression because it's their land and we're stealing it. He said that. He also said that, God gave them the right to steal it. But the point being that violence is baked into this enterprise, and that this settler sensibility was there from the start. Anyway.
And the propaganda, I mean, the ideology of Zionism, it was justified, and a lot of the propaganda in the background doing the justification was just as you described. So it was, number one, the non-Jewish humans can't be trusted. And they have a whole history, hundreds of years of history to point to and say, look, they don't treat us right. We have to have our own state. And so this is upheld. This false notion of racial differences was upheld through this propaganda saying, we can't trust non-Jewish people, and hey, Jewish people are better anyway. We're just we're racially superior.
Add to that the philosophy that this state has to grow. The Ersatz Israel always has to get larger and larger at the expense of other people's land.
Well, this is happening because, of course, the USA is providing the arms to do it. Israel does not have the means to wage this kind of warfare without them. Biden himself is a vegetable, but who's his second?
Ian, a Politico headline: U.S. won't punish Israel for Rafah operation that doesn't protect civilians. Sources, those anonymous sources. We won't punish them. It's basically enabled. Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
Well, look, who's the Secretary of State? A Zionist. Who's our treasurer? A Zionist. Who's Kamala Harris's husband? A Zionist. Can we be surprised? Can we be surprised?
The majority of the cabinet have dual citizenship, are Zionists. And it bears mentioning again that for all the scolding and finger pointing from the Saudis and the UAE and Turkey and all of those countries are helping Israel get weapons and food and supplies.
Yes, they are.
All of them.
Their people have very changed attitudes, but the leadership, you're quite right. They're enablers as well, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's not just people who identify as Jewish that are Zionists, right? Biden says he's a Zionist. There's a lot of Christian Zionists. A lot of the right-wing Republicans are pro-Zionist because of their diluted Christianity, that claims Israel fulfilled Bible prophecy in 1949, and we've got to support Israel if we're going to get God's support as a nation. Like, I don't know if they believe that, but a lot of their constituents certainly believe that.
Yes. When I was a kid in church and we'd have the kids Sunday school, I remember a particular
you went
class.
to religious
we had no Sunday school. I'm sorry. This is where you go to church and the kids go off. They don't sit in the pews. The younger kids have a separate youth teacher and they have a separate sermon. It's very common in Baptist churches in the USA. But and there's one So even starting at a young age, they talk about Zionism, that, Israel, that's where the final battle between good and evil is going to happen. That's why we have to support Israel.
Javier Milei comes to
I
mind.
remember for some reason, I remember this one particular sermon from our youth teacher, our youth pastor that we had, and the Chinese were there for some reason. He mentioned, China will probably be there with 1 million-man army to help there. It was very... It's quite a mental image, but...
Mike Pompeo is a dominionist Christian and is a believer in
he's a
the
pretty
rapture.
Good dancer as well. Pretty good dancer.
Yeah, and he dances.
Pretty good dancer, you say.
Yeah. So he's a rabid Zionist because it's part of the whole architecture.
He did lose some weight.
10 seconds is more than enough of that. But yeah, that's a couple of kilometers away from Gaza. Okay? That's Porky Mike Pompeo, former CIA director and a Secretary of State.
Yeah. It's a battle of Megiddo. It's apocalyptic. It's the end of the world. It's really, from my perspective, as crazy as it gets.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody can be sacrificed. Everybody's up for grabs.
I think it was early in this week, but the first thing that came into my mind was a headline from Javier Milei, the new Argentine asshole, who went straight from the Wailing Wall, crying uncontrollably, to the Pope and brought him biscuits. And apparently he made a statement that he wants to tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque to build the temple and bring about the Messiah. That's the level of his absolute... I mean, this was...
the fuck did he get elected,
I think many Argentinians are asking themselves.
That was just the last Hail Mary when every other candidate up to that point has failed. It's kind of...
I guess.
Going to pieces.
They've been hammered so hard by the IMF and the World Bank for decades. I think so many people were actually living in poverty in Argentina that anybody could be elected. I mean, we have Trump.
And now welcome to triple that poverty, basically.
We have a new Marcos in the Philippines. It's just absurd the way international politics has gone.
That's true. And also a new Sukarno or Suharto. I always get them mixed up in Indonesia.
Right. Yeah. A new Sukarno, human rights abuse guy.
Yeah,
what's his
general
name?
And political family.
Yeah.
Well, I ask a question here because this comes up. I see this a lot in social media, and I've mentioned it on our podcast a few times. This conflation of communism and fascism, and that the right wing in America, in particular, the sort of MAGA guys, but just in general, the far right, disenfranchised working class, imagine that the World Economic Forum represents world
Marxism.
communism.
Yeah.
Well, I can explain that actually. So it's kind of it's double genocide theory. I think is the most concrete origin of the fascism and communism are the same thing, and it started ironically with Hitler himself because he painted the Soviet Union as the aggressor. That's that Germany had to do a preemptive strike
because the Judo-Bolsheviks.
Bolsheviks had committed a genocide. And of course, that's also where the whole Holodomor myth started. That there was this deliberate Jewish-controlled genocide of people, and they were going to spread to Western Europe unless the defender of Europe, Germany, stopped them first. And so then that got turned into double genocide theory in the 1990s. How the communist genocide was the same, if not worse.
By the way, the term Red-Brown Alliance that actually comes from the 1990s Moscow. It comes from, I think, Gorbachev, but it might have been the drunk afterwards, might have been Yeltsin when he burned the parliament, right? That was Yeltsin.
Well,
because the old communists and the new nationalists were kind of, we don't want you guys. We actually want to keep the Soviet Union. That's where it came from.
Yeah. I mean, I asked this, I brought it up because it's like this conundrum. It's this really perplexing question because you find yourself these same right-wing people that think Klaus Schwab is a communist are very good about Iran. They support Palestine. They support the farmers' protests in Europe.
A lot of them say "fuck Ukraine" as well.
Anyone, yeah. And your educated white liberal who knows the difference often and been gone to university.
They are worse.
They don't. They're
That's the lesson. The last 2 years of my life.
So yeah, it's very confusing. One finds oneself aligned with people you don't necessarily want to be aligned with in some ways, and yet, we're your enemy is my enemy, whatever. And
I'm gonna respond to that later.
It's just very strange, and it speaks to. I mean, I've written a number of blog posts on this and on my blog, but it firstly represents something about the collapse of public education in the West, and you don't. It's very easy to find studies and examples of what has happened, that people's vocabularies have shrunk. They know far fewer words than 50 years ago. Something like 70% of high school students don't know how to write cursively, and actually
I don't know if they know how to read, period. There's a lot of just functional illiterate people.
Thank you. By the way, quickly add, there's Dmitry Polyansky, who is the the second UN appointee of Russia, right? Vice, ambassador to Russia. And he said, somebody asked the question, why don't you answer with the old classics? Because you used to use Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and all that. And he said, well, the discourse with the West has gotten so primitive, he uses this word, that we simplify it just to get the message across. I mean, doesn't that just underline your point?
Yeah. Well, but the presidential debates are like use fourth grade vocabulary.
Even before Trump, they did.
It's a super interesting topic that I'm thinking about a lot all the time, because I'm trying to, try and help people to have a correct perspective, have a correct understanding about things. And I've noticed that, people are divided into, embracing so many different narratives. So like you spoke to the liberals, the liberals know the difference between fascism and communism. But then the people that are aligned with us on, on the Ukraine issue, on the Israel issue, they're the ones that kind of see fascism and communism as the same thing. And they see, Biden as a Marxist,
No,
let me add.
You brought up the point, John, on your podcast that, one good paradigm is to say that, communism is anti-fascism and fascism is anti-communism. And I like that. That's helpful and useful. And I would agree with that.
Putin made that same point.
But you gotta understand that to understand any of that, you've got to understand the reality of class and class struggle and how class dynamics drive events and drive strategies, drive policies. If you don't understand class, then, and they don't, because class is what's ignored and completely erased from everybody's brain. They're thinking in liberal terms like nationalism. They don't realize that there's a nationalism of the bourgeoisie, then there's a nationalism of the proletariat, which is entirely different, with different agendas and different, different interests.
Yeah, but, no, people, that's absolutely true. And I've said that, many others have said that idea was consciously, intentionally erased from Western discourse, class. It's just gone. And then like Fox News and the far right propagandists and, everybody like Bill Kristol to whoever, started employing it as a offhand pejorative. Oh, class warfare. Yeah, you're one of those. Okay. And so it just became a radioactive term, radioactive idea. You can't use it. And it's so crucial to understanding
absolutely fundamental.
Anything.
Just to add a quick European flavor to this, I've seen a lot of exclusively Western European, French, German accounts saying, look, the farmers are fighting climate communism. They unironically, without think, that's what they're fighting. Whereas Eastern Europe, we only had this propaganda for about 30 years. and we say, oh, we're standing up to climate fascism. You know, we kind of remember a little bit more, but it's like the divide still exists. So
It becomes a clearer picture if you consider libertarians, because what the general population, the red state population, is essentially expounding is Lyndon LaRouche, the way I remember him.
Yep,
and
that's a great
with
point.
all the racism that's in there, that was in he would be on he would have people on campus when I was at university.
Yes, but he's still. I mean, those people are still around.
Yes, and they would be against the war, but if you delved any closer, they were anti-immigration. They're just like now. And I think that's had I don't want to call it insidious, but that's had an effect on people in the red states, and it explains their position. That's as far as I want to take it. But it explains a lot about their positions on all kinds of policy. So,
well, I think that's an incredibly great point, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, because I often forget that LaRouche and his people are still out. I guess LaRouche is dead, but that the LaRoucheites are still out. They publish papers. They never use their name, and you often get, if you'll be reading an article and you'll get this funny, like almost like uncanny thing, and go, "What's wrong with this piece?" You know.
I know what you're talking about.
It seems okay, but I mean, and invariably, if you look it up, it's LaRouche. It's LaRouche's people.
There's more nuance there. There's more than one LaRouche group, and I make differences between them. There's this and that. But I'm wondering, when we talk about propaganda, if we can sort of, I know, John, that for you, it's mostly connected to Israel and Gaza, which is true. But let's not forget, there's also another theater going on right now, which is Ukraine, where the Avdiivka settlement, all the Western headlines were really losing. And for that, it looks like it was also a good, cover to have the Navalny stuff, the space nukes. And two little interview follow-ups I want to talk about. One was Putin had a little interview with Zarubin, and he said, all this Nazi propaganda, we should have a worldwide struggle against it. Obviously, no one's going to buy that, because he said all the Western countries view the world through this supremacist lens, which is exactly how that began. He's Absolutely. Not just talking about Nazi Germany anymore or Israel. While I think Netanyahu warned Putin that Iran wants to kill another, I don't know how many million Jews, which is ridiculous. But he also regretted, and this should have been part of the Tucker interview, not starting the SMO in 2014 and trusting the West. And then this is like 4D chess. He was disappointed in Tucker because he didn't ask really tough questions, so he could give tough answers, which was great. And then he said, this is like the KGB officer that he once was, that he prefers Biden over Trump because he's more predictable, which I really like. That's just playing with the minds of the Western propaganda, and people may have seen the short Tucker follow-ups since then. He's fallen in love with Russian McDonald's. He went to a Russian Auchan, like a supermarket, say, look, it's $100, not $400. Then he went to the Kievskaya Moscow station, and that's the Stalin era, absolutely beautiful, and fell in love with that. And that's why I wanted to quickly respond to Tucker that, he was an anti-China hawk, but when he was asked what his worldview is, he said it's simple. It changes with the facts. And the Chinese people, the pro-China people, were outraged that this interview is taking place. Afterwards, they say, that was awesome. Bring him to China. They launched petitions. Come to China next. We want to show you Guangzhou. We want to show you this metro. So, he's capable of change. And I think I feel vindicated that I said that. But I want
to get to, Ian visited this NATO War Trophy Park in Moscow. And I want to get to that. But before that, I do want to discuss this issue that Ben just raised, because I kind of see it dividing, the normal people I hang out with on Facebook. There's this division about regarding Carlson. And so half of them are attacking Carlson as don't trust him, like it's all part of a plan. And he's not authentic, right? And then some people are saying like, well, I mean, maybe he's authentic, maybe he's not, but what does it really matter? I mean, the fact is he's saying and doing things that, you know, that are beneficial, that are helping people to move in the right direction. And I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Because I can kind of see both sides.
This is a great question, and the same question came up when Oliver Stone did his 2 films on Ukraine.
Is he an asset? Is he?
Yeah, and I said, I think the films are great. You know, is this the voice of, you know, Che Guevara? No, it's Oliver Stone, but he's radicalized himself to some extent, and these are like training wheel documentaries, you know, when you'll ride the bicycle without any help. I think it's all good. The same thing came up with Russell Brand, and people would say, oh, but you know, he was married to Katy Perry. I said, look, you know, don't beat guys up for bad choices in marriage, because I would be punished forever. But, you know, Brand he woken up, and he's done a lot of good things, and he still makes tons of missteps, and he's seduced by certain, you know, figures in power and stuff, but he's also done some great things, had some great interviews. So I'm kind of with Ben on the Tucker Carlson thing. I said, you know, look, to say that Tucker Carlson is not a great intellectual and that he's a product of you know, the spectacle and
that's what's awesome about him. He's an everyman, John.
Yeah.
That's what makes him powerful.
But I mean, if you have to, that's obvious. That's a given that he's not, you know, he comes from privilege of a Republican family, I believe. And
CIA daddy.
There's what?
CIA daddy, Voice of America editor. He bragged that he was in Moscow in the 1980s, and like every second building had power. I don't know how the fuck they did Olympics that way, but that was the propaganda then.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect much from the interview. I was pleased that Americans, however many million have watched this, got exposed to Putin in a different light. I think that's great. It's all to the good. How much good, you know, I don't know, but I don't see anything negative about it. And I think that those people who I read on social media or I talk to in person here, who say, oh, you know, Tucker Carlson, it's all a big, you know, this kind of reflexive cynicism, I find really tedious and just too easy. And those people eventually end up being cynical about everything. And that's
the fact.
One of my favorite Adorno quotes is cynicism is just another mode of conformity.
I know that it's a hashtag cancel culture, but it is an attempt to cancel his voice. And there's this massive wall of propaganda. Everything beyond it is deep, dark Soviet Russia. And he pierced a hole right through that wall. And for that, I can only, you know, applaud him. And that's why a lot of Chinese people are saying, look, you really have to come to China. I have to show you. And getting back to NATO, I was getting there, but too slowly. Sorry about that. Because this whole thing, you know, the Avdiivka collapse, he got no Zelensky. And even the Foreign Secretary of Britain said, please, US, you have to sign this 60 billion because we're having problems. NATO is in a panic, but I had more to say, but you know what? Since it's already shared, Ian did a huge tour.
Well, my bad.
I'm just gonna piano through it because
the big thing here is, and I want to tie this in with the new news, that's this vote is just going to be delayed. Because I was wondering about that. Because earlier I've been saying this since December that basically, don't scroll through just yet. Just leave it.
I'm going back to the top.
Sorry. Thanks. No, you're good. The big thing is that, I was predicting, I was just like, okay, in the next couple of weeks, they're going to get the next aid package. There's no way they're not going to get the aid package to Ukraine. Here we are mid-February, a month and a half after I said that. And they're pushing it to the end of the month at least.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I'm surprised as well, Ian.
NATO and the Ukraine accounts are labeling whoever the speaker is, Johnson or something.
Johnson, yes.
He's a traitor.
He's a Vatnik. He's a Vatnik.
He's a traitor to the US, to Ukraine.
But yes, if you want to bring up the slideshow, I'm going to tie that in. So this first one here. So this is medical. This is first aid stuff. You have combat gauze. You have all these.
Looks familiar.
Tourniquets. Yes, it should be familiar because this is stuff we get. And then you can go to the next one. The big thing is that I want to emphasize it's just in how much trouble they are, because everything. I mean, not everything, because Ukraine does make some of their own stuff. They do have some of that Soviet era manufacturing capability, but like everything from boots to first aid kits to radios, everything is just vehicles. It's just that's a British medevac vehicle. There's a stretcher. You can see more. Almost everything in this picture is NATO origin. Go to the next one. American Humvee.
With the turret, I like that they put flags on it, like where the trophy is.
Yes, that was helpful because people aren't necessarily going to get that. And there's the good old AT4. Then there's some mines. Again, some of it, Ukraine does make some of their own stuff, and they do label with the flags the stuff that is made in there. So there's a big large section about mine warfare in here. I think this is, yes.
I think that's Austria.
Austria. Yeah. It is Austria.
Yeah. No.
Austria.
Wow.
Yeah. So they've got a little
neutral country who insists we're not part of this conflict.
Yes. Yes. And so the big thing is that in radio. So I'd say that's one of the biggest contributions.
Which
both
one
sides.
of those is the Starlink?
You know what? I did actually get picked. They did have a Starlink display. I forgot to actually share those pictures, but there was in fact a Starlink display. I don't think they actually stole a Starlink satellite. They had a mock-up for what the satellite looks like. Had the display screen. They had a mannequin with it. I unfortunately forgot to share that picture, but it was in this same section as the communications equipment, because the big thing is that when you're in a military conflict, you don't want unencrypted plain text communications with each other. I mean, both sides did it a lot, especially near the beginning, especially the Donbass militias and the Ukrainian side, because they just didn't have enough military grade communications gear to go on, and NATO really filled the gaps in that. A lot of these I recognize, these are just your pretty standard Harris radios. You can go to the next one. There's several of these pictures of these communications equipment. There's one particular picture I want to go to.
Okay. Just moving on.
Keep going. See radios.
China?
And stop. Wait. Go. Yes. So there are some. So there's some Chinese drones, Chinese radio equipment, commercial type stuff that you can buy from China, and there was actually quite a bit of it. And this was the one I wanted. So this is a Blue Force tracker. So it's a situational awareness tool. So if your vehicle, it's too big for a person to carry, but if your vehicles have it, and it's GPS, it's on the GPS network, so you can see where you are and where all of your other vehicles and adjacent units are. The big thing is, just from looking at this museum, it's clear that before the special military operation started and in the early stages of it, NATO is really envisioning the Ukrainian war effort being this kind of irregular, light infantry centric, like Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, basically.
Yes.
They're very big on that being the model of a modern war. It was so completely off. You'll notice that heavy equipment that was actually useful. The Ukraine really shifted back to a Soviet style method.
Oh, there's
fighting.
more pictures.
No, that's a different topic. I wanted Ian to sort of.
But yes, and you can really see that from the early shipments.
That's
I think
an interesting
training
point. That's an interesting point.
Because they were envisioning, it's going to be guerrilla warfare, irregular warfare, hit and run tactics, and that just had no basis in reality. And I think that's because NATO's just not had a real conflict in so long. They had this whole idea that was so completely divorced from reality. That just does not work. You need all that old stuff. You need those tanks. You need those big artillery barrages. And I think that really hurt them, doctrinally, because the big one, and I read all these NATO, cheerleaders talking about this. So you have on-call artillery, every Ukrainian soldier can call in an artillery strike. Well, that works in Afghanistan when you're fighting guys in sandals and there's not a lot of competition for your limited resources. But when you're in a situation like Ukraine, where there's so many targets, you're firing thousands and thousands of shells, you can't have every Joe calling in artillery strikes. It doesn't work. So you really had to go back to a more centralized fire planning approach. And the problem is that the command staff, anything at a brigade or higher, that takes years to train. Not just training individual soldiers, but training your command teams takes
command staff
years.
Yeah.
It takes years. And they had to start from scratch after that war already started. I think that really hurt them. And you see, and honestly, looking back, I don't think NATO themselves realized there was a problem until after the counteroffensive failed. After that 2023 offensive. So a year and a half into it, they didn't even realize there was a problem with how they were approaching it until they had that failure. But if we can go back to the pictures, there were a few others I wanted to point out here.
Okay.
Do you want to? Well, right. Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. What was the question?
No, I had some different topics in mind, but I'll get back to the pictures.
He had thrown up some different photos. But
this is where we were.
There's nothing. There's a couple little points I want to point out. So there's, of course, you got your javelins, your big, that was going to be the game changer. And that's, again, it's that infantry centric approach, because the javelin was the only thing they were talking about for a while.
Look, I remember the Western headlines. Ukrainians are calling their children javelin and javelina.
Yes, it was just, there's some vehicles in here. And there's, that's a 40 millimeter grenade launcher that we have.
Tell me about the rifle. That looks ancient, like a Mosin Nagant.
Yeah, they got some. Ukrainian. Oh, and if you look over there, you look in that far left corner right there.
Far left corner.
The Maxim, Maxim. I didn't get the better picture of it, but you see that Maxim machine gun, the World War I.
Oh, that's the World War I.
They got. I think ancient. Every Ukraine display is obligated to have that machine gun in it. I think it's iconic. At the beginning of the war, we had those memes of people using it, but and so I wanted to point out this picture specifically because they were like, oh, slat armor, it's a cope cage, it doesn't work. And well, what is that? It's a NATO vehicle, British vehicle with a cope cage on it. Who would have
covered with a cope cage? Yeah.
Yes, and then there's the French. That's the French AMX. That was another game-changing vehicle.
A wheeled,
that goofy wheeled tank that France sent, and then so this is the M113. This is just your Vietnam era transport vehicle, and the next picture will show what these different calibers do. A 30 millimeter and that 12.7 is a 50 cal round. That's what those do to it. And then there's.
And then there's looks another, like papier-mâché.
So there's an MRAP. That's an anti-IED warfare vehicle that we used a lot in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then there's another one here after that. That's a Ukrainian BMP. And then there's another one. There's one specific. Okay, so this is what shrapnel will do to these vehicles. So, I noticed a lot. And I showed this picture in particular because there were several. I saw several vehicles like this, completely perforated with shrapnel, because there's that debate, when you see these plumes, these dramatic plumes of smoke, and there's this debate, well, did that shell that struck close to a vehicle actually damage it? That's a debate that's been going on, but this kind of, I think, illustrates it. Yes, anything, most of these armored vehicles out there can get just turned into Swiss cheese by standard artillery. So that was that's basically it for.
It looked like you picked a beautiful day to head out.
Yes, it was about.
I saw a very blue sky.
16. Well, it was about 16 below that day Celsius. So it's
what it is here still, sadly.
Yes.
Look, compare that to there was this amazing headlines in the West, but Putin basically visited the Ural Vagon Zavod factory where all the T-90 the tanks are made. And there was a huge amount of stress in the NATO headlines, not just the space nukes, but I'm just going to, just read a couple of them. Like Russia already claims that 15,000 tanks have been destroyed in this operation. That's from the Ministry of Defense. But here's Europe. The US, sorry, after Ura wagons, Russia can withstand years of equipment losses at current levels, and those current levels are probably from the Ukrainian infantry numbers. The second one is from The Guardian, a lot higher than we expected. Russian arms production worries Europe's war planners, basically. Financial Times, London. The West has gone far enough in sanctioning, has not gone far enough. We cannot help Ukraine outproduce Russia. So when the space nukes came out, and this is what I also wanted to show you, just a couple of pictures, mostly exclusively from Russian accounts. This is what the Russians came up with, like this is what the West fears. Shoigu's, what do you call it?
Yes.
Super mech. Then there's Shoigu's space washing machine. And Shoigu's built the Death Star, and I love that it's classic Soviet as well. But that's the kind of funny stuff they're making, because let's not forget, this is the Munich Security Conference, where in most regards this started. He's going there with a huge loss on his hands around Avdiivka, including something that's only rumored by both sides, you know, that massive strike on a grouping. He's got no 60 billion from the US. I mean, what does he do? He slams like a Czech MLRS into innocent people in Belgorod once again, and that's it. He's got no fucking cards, and obviously Navalny's wife is the other. He thinks an ace in the hole. It's just so smells of desperation, you know.
Well, didn't the two British naval vessels both broke down right?
One after the other.
One after the other, both aircraft carriers.
They were supposed to take part in this largest NATO.
And they both broke down, and a U.S. ship had to return to the U.S. because there were multiple problems. So you know, and you should read Cy Hirsch's column today about.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
The 3 Navy SEALs who died.
There's news on that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, you have to read Hirsch with, you know, a certain perspective, but he has reliable sources as far as it goes on certain topics, and the real takeaway was that the military sort of the command structure, the officer class is in woeful condition, that it's just an ineffective army now compared to what it was 30 years ago.
Now, I'm sorry, just to clarify, are these the Navy SEALs that allegedly got washed away during an anti-Somalian pirate operation, or is this a different group that
I think it's the 3 in Tower 22, right? In this either Syria or Jordan. Is that the one, John Steppling?
No, this is
those were soldiers.
They were trying to refuel. I don't know all the technical aspects of this, but the SEAL commander said, no, we can't go out. The seas are too rough. And he refused to send people out. And those above him said, you have to go out and do this. And they did, and they died because it was an impossible mission.
Oh, this was California, wasn't it? There's a chopper went down. Maybe that's not it.
Okay,
there's a lot of these.
I don't know.
Those were Marines. The helicopter crash were Marines.
Okay. Sorry, there's too many of these.
Navy SEALs were in the operation in the Red Sea, and then the 3 guys at Tower 22, that was regular Marines.
Those were soldiers, and then those were soldiers. Army soldiers, and then the Marines were in the helicopter crash. Now
too many to follow. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there are training accidents that happen every year. I think there's more scrutiny on them. When I was going through training for a deployment to Kuwait in Fort Hood, Texas, there was a nasty, where actually it wasn't our unit, but it was actually the guys training our unit who had a very unpleasant hard landing in a Black Hawk helicopter in Fort Hood, Texas, that crashed and killed all of them, unfortunately. So these accidents do happen. So I know there's a tendency to say, oh, no, it's a conspiracy. They're covering up casualties in Ukraine now. Yeah. There are legitimate accidents that happen. We just, up until now, we're not paying attention to them.
No doubt. The point I think Hirsch was making was
it was a training problem or a command problem.
Overriding the people who were on, in the guy said you should look out the window. The transcript was, look out the window. You can see the seas are impossible to carry out any kind of activity on.
Wow.
And so people had been writing to Lloyd Austin, apparently saying this commander should be brought up on charges and blah, blah, blah. But,
is he out of hospital again?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
Well, he has his deputy. Apparently, he's transitioned authority to his deputy.
True.
Because of his
emergent bladder problems. That's the official.
Yes.
I hate when bladder problems are emergent. Yeah, that's a whole separate, very odd story. I don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to circle back something because Ben had brought it up. I mean, two things. One is the Tucker Carlson interview and propaganda, and just more opinions about that, because I'm really curious to sort of clock how that interview has been received by the public, because I'm not reading anything about how many millions of people, 17 million people or something, watched this video. I'm not hearing what they thought about it in general. That's number one. And two is the LaRouche thing is a subject for a whole program.
Yeah, true. I agree. I agree.
It would be worth having because it's one of those topics and realities that flies below the radar. And there's a number of left writers who are associated with Canadian universities, I know, and professors up there who seem great, but you read them and you start.
I've had it with left academics. That's my current point of view.
We could get into it. I mean, I've had some shocks lately on the Hamas IDF front with left academics that I would never have suspected.
You'd have a stroke just looking at the basic topics in Hungarian, the Academy of Sciences. It's absolutely foreign. Like it's taken.
I'd like to comment on the Putin Carlson interview, but first I want to make a minor point in case we have somebody who's a nitpicker. It's Suharto. This guy that was elected in Indonesia is a Suharto clone, not a Sukarno clone. Suharto was the one who led the slaughter of nearly 1 million people with the Central Intelligence Agency in 65, 66.
Prabowo Subianto, I can't do better than that.
Subianto, that's it. So, but I immediately, after the interview, I immediately went on to the Washington Post, which is our hometown newspaper, and there were several articles, and they were all vastly critical of the interview. But I read several hundred of the comments, and virtually all of them, without exception, there was one were very hostile toward the interview. Now, my wife pointed out that they could be hired to present. The Washington Post has
it could be
serious money, but anyway, they were very, very hostile toward Putin, but almost to the point of hysteria, and there was no context to their hysteria. It was empty. It was like the fact that there was a Maidan coup in 2014 and another coup actually in 2004. Putin said 2005. Both involved Yanukovych. That there was accords. That was all new apparently to these people. And they were,
Carlo, quick question: were they also hostile and angry at Tucker or just at Putin?
They were angry at
both
Tucker
of them
too. Yeah, for being a dupe and.
Why do you think the Oliver Stone stuff is not coming up and being referenced in connection to this?
No,
it didn't get much play. Not many people know about it.
This got a lot of play.
Ukraine on Fire, I don't think it got really mainstreamed at all.
I think HBO ran it, didn't they? I don't know.
I think so. But that doesn't mean that
yeah.
it's been put in everybody's mind. A lot of people have never even heard about it.
I know. And so one takeaway then from this 17 million views of the Tucker Carlson interview is that Tucker Carlson is a huge celebrity now. And so that's why people watched it. Because the Stone interview and film on Putin has been around for a number of years and nobody goes to see it. It's strange. I'm just trying to, I'm thinking aloud because I'm trying to kind of untangle that. It's surprising.
Well,
not to mention, let's get things garbled. They don't remember.
And the relevance, because that was prior to the SMO. That was prior to, getting closer to, World War III. So now that we're a lot closer with everything that's happened, I think if Oliver Stone sat down with Putin too, I think it would be much bigger than his documentary from several years ago. But it's not really people really wanting to seek out the truth, because if they really want to seek out the truth, I mean, it's available, they can find it. But
but I think this, if anything, is praise of Oliver Stone, but he's more obscure than Tucker, because Tucker has this story. He was first Republican, then or liberal, then a Republican. Then he got fired from Fox and went independent. Tucker on X interviewing interesting people, and then he made this big teaser of "I'm going to Moscow" and all of that. There was huge buzz around it, and to his credit, Mr. Apartheid Miner, Elon Musk didn't filter it. Didn't filter the interview. He actually pumped it right up. So there's
does have a point here with his assertion that they're trying to push the idea that only the right wing wants to have peace with Russia. Is that maybe?
No,
I think that's ridiculous.
It's so here's the thing about Tucker. So I would say he is authentic, and a lot of blue collar people in red states and flyover country and the rest built really like him, and he does, I think, speak authentically, even if it's not always from the most unfortunately not always the most educated place he's talking from, but he does speak authentically. And the thing about Tucker, he's a California Democrat, so it's interesting that now he's just a right-wing extremist. He was never a right. He was always, 10 years ago, you've been kind of a center-right figure. It shows how we've shifted. So as far as when Tucker himself, he does, I think Tucker himself gets into the whole equivalating fascism and communism thing, as does Trump. But I think when Tucker does talk about the institutional left, I think is the word he uses for it. I think that's accurate for the establishments that you have with the Democratic Party and that Biden administration represents. That's the American left wing. That's the hegemonic American left wing. And we can say, oh, that's not the real left wing. It's in the context of American politics, the no true Scotsman fallacy isn't true. That is essentially what the institutional left, love it or hate it, is what the institutional left looks like in the U.S.
It depends on how you define left, and that's a whole can of worms.
Well, it goes back to the French Revolution, which side of the room you sat on. It's
right. And I wouldn't say the Democrats would be on the left side of that room, but in this country, they're called the left. So it's just
So are liberals in Europe, which have nothing to do with what used to be called the left. John, while I have you, I don't mean to muddy this topic, but I really want to show you something, because you were basically my crystal ball on this. This appeared on the Hungarian Magyar Hírlap. It's kind of tabloidy, but in the middle. And I'm going to hit translate on this, and then you'll see it in English. And
helps.
Look at that. This was in Hungarian press. Some constitutional lawyer went through the constitution because someone requested that Kamala Harris should say Biden, get out because you have memory loss and I'll be the temporary president. And he went through the constitution saying, they're going to brush off Michelle Obama. So I wanted to say kudos to you for foreseeing this if it should happen. I wanted to show that.
Sheets and scores. I think I have to depart here momentarily, but what Billy Bob said about Democrats on the left, only the stupidest of liberals would think that. I hear it too, though, and people still think that. There's all these kind of weird generalizations that go on out there. And one is conflating fascism and communism. One is thinking that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and people that meet at Davos are climate communists or something, whatever that means.
Kamal is a Marxist, just so you know.
And they're, because people have not read Marx. Also, sidebar, you find endless numbers of anti-Marx articles now in media. It's just a phenomenon. But anyway,
preemptive.
people are not educated in this area, and language is deteriorated, education is deteriorated, and so it's very, very difficult to, in any kind of coherent fashion, engage with people that are kind of politically immature in this way, because they have no consistent reference points that you can work with, and class being, Billy Lobb was quite right, the foremost problem in all of this, because this people have said to me, can you explain communism? And as soon as you get to class, they're like, what do you what is that? What? Yeah. And it's very hard. All of it is very hard. And I think this is what we should all be doing in some way. It's what our group tries to do and hopes to do more, is have like the alternative university, the People's University. And that's, I guess, what these podcasts are too, that we're doing is an attempt to elucidate these things for more and more people in some fashion or other. And I feel this is the only kind of hope, in a sense, because if one trusts the system at all, you were going to go crazy, and you were going to imprison yourself. Ultimately, it's hopeless. And okay,
Axel and your other son, Axel and
Alfred, they're the twins. Yeah,
they need your attention. John, thank you so much. I'm going to remove
my
you.
pleasure, guys. Thank you.
See you
And
next
we'll talk about LaRouche. All right.
Sorry, I bumped him out too quick. Yeah, so that was, I love John's words there, especially when he says I'm right. I love to hear that, especially.
Can I share a quick anecdote? Just
right. It's an issue, and I don't know how to address that issue other than to do things like this. And I think we just have to use those avenues that are available to us to try and help a general public that they're just.
We're not going to get Moshe Obama as president.
I'm sorry. That was just something that's personal to John, because that was one of his.
Yeah, that was one of his, and you might. I mean, you could be right. What do we think is going to happen? I mean, do we want to prognosticate here? Like, I don't know what they're going to do. Biden
if you want to talk elections,
let's do it.
Before that, can I do a quick anecdote?
Okay.
Just
sort
of Eastern European thing that what John said was the foundations, as in class, were sort of confused away. And I think that's very true, especially in Europe where we had communism. And I'm not going to piss on New Zealanders per se, pick them out, because I think it's the same in maybe Norway and maybe America. But I was walking the street back when I lived there, and a little kid said to Mum, "What's communism?" I said, "Don't you remember Animal Farm? It's when someone else tells you what to do." And I think that is the completion of their studies of what communism is. You can tell me if you're wrong. But for there, it hasn't been confused away. It hasn't been obscured from history like it has here. It's just never, ever been introduced. And I think that means the US and these Western states, they face a larger hill, a larger obstacle to actually get to, a proper working political theory than we do.
Because of the backwardsness of the the mass psychology.
It's Animal Farm. That's communism. That's kindergarten level.
Yeah. Biden.
Okay.
There's nothing there. The man's gone.
He's gone.
It's just ridiculous.
you know, I'm an old man. I can tell when other old people are losing, and I'm around them sometimes. You know, it's terrible. But
so what are they gonna do?
Yeah.
They're in a spot, Carlo. They are in a spot.
It's too late to bring somebody else into the mix.
Other than
think so,
Kamala.
too.
But everybody in America, I hope, would hate Kamala. I mean, come on.
They do.
She's got
she
negative
would lose.
charisma, no brain. History is historic.
Are they going to do weekend at Biden's until the election, and then he'll just drop out after week 1, and she'll be
No, I think they're going to
no.
keep, because they're having the time of their lives. The Anthony Blinkens and Austins and everybody can do whatever the hell they want. They're like their own little fiefdoms. There's no one telling them what to do. They can do whatever the perpetual deep state can do whatever the hell they want. There's no one even pretending to rein them in. I mean, do you remember? I mean, there was a video like within the first week of Biden taking office. This is kind of a farcical tradition for us, but it's a tradition where you have the new president sit at the desk and he signs a bunch of executive orders that pretty much repeal everything the previous presidents did. It's like an American tradition at this point. And at one point he was like, I don't even know what I'm signing. He actually says it out loud. It's like
here's the difference between 4 years. He was inaugurated with Lady Gaga being a big splash, wearing a blue dress, right? Then he got into office. And now pretty much all the press is about that fucking Taylor Swift is going to swing the election. That's like, it's idiocracy.
Well, that's big. That's big. I mean, you remember all those meetings during the whole COVID thing where Biden would have these Oval Office meetings with the big TikTok influencers in the country. Jesus. That's the thing he did. And they did it for Ukraine too. I mean, it's just like, here's the message that we want all these influencers, the TikTok people to do. It's just, and I wouldn't even say it's a dumb strategy. It's just like if you're just going to go for the lowest common denominator.
So Ian, given
headline
your
from the Hill, and you're next. I promise, Billy Bob. Democrats unveil new hip hop task force to tackle racial inequality. That is such deliberate.
Hip hop task force. Yes, the private sector is going to
unleash the hip hop task force.
So how long will Biden remain in office? Like, is he going to manage through the election? And then if so, how long into his 4-year term? And then who will come after? I mean, we're just guessing here. Ian, what do you think?
Well, I think they're going to, I mean, as long as he doesn't die.
Fall over in the shower. And
if he doesn't die, and they'll keep him in and they'll try to get him reelected and keep him in another 4 years. I see no evidence that that's not the plan at this point.
Weekend at Biden's.
And he can last another 4.
I think Ian makes good points.
This is sarcastic and I'm making a joke, but someone said he might collapse on stage and people will still scream, 4 more years.
Yeah.
He could die on stage.
What Carlos said, you're right. If their plan was to replace him, they would have done it already. It's too late at this point. They already kind of got behind him. There's no primary to go after a serious Democratic candidate. I don't know what their plan is for beating Trump. I think maybe they're doing a Hail Mary to hope they can just keep Trump off the ballot. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
I just know how they work in narratives and they work in, things. So I'm just waiting for the next big thing to happen, the next justification for something, because they're going to come out with a story and it's going to be, okay, because of this, we have to do this. And it's going to involve the election and the president, the Democratic candidate, but maybe not, maybe.
I'm with. I recently watched a Mark Sloboda short. I think with DD Geopolitics, Sarah. She's amazing, and he's. I know you think I support Trump than you guys do. I hate him. I think equally as you guys do. But Mark called him the chaos bomb. You don't know how far. It's not good news for you. It's not good news for me. But he could be the bomb to fucking blow this shit apart. The same reason I support Ursula for NATO.
Mm-hmm. But with what Putin said, that Biden's more predictable. I think it was half a joke, but half not a joke, because with Biden, he's representing the establishment. They put that chip in his brain and tell him what to say. He reads off the teleprompter. That's what the establishment is thinking. But we don't even know what he's going to do with the Ukraine. It's like he contradicts himself every other week on it. It's like it's either I would negotiate peace, or I would do a better job of arming Ukraine so they would win. It's like, well, which is it? Who freaking knows? I think from the perspective of other world leaders with Trump, it's just like who knows?
Chaos bomb.
It's a chaos bomb. But I think ultimately what Putin said in that same interview is that they'll respect whoever the president of the USA is. I think that's ultimately the Russian position. It's Russians, ask me, they just say to me, I can't even tell the difference between Republicans and Democrats. They seem like the same.
So they're not going to determine an actual U.S. president who's in exile that they're going to go ahead and try and work with?
Of course, Putin is just going to push a button at his desk, and that's the person who wins the U.S. election.
That's right.
He controls so much of this world.
He controls everything except Russia because, this guy in jail was in danger of overthrowing him. So, it's just.
Well, what Ben described is Steve Bannon's plan to bring chaos to the U.S. and around the world if possible. I mean, that's what he sees as the future. He sees that if he can bring everything down, it will fall. What's left will fall into his lap.
Just why are they united against him if he's the controlled opposition?
Yeah, his
every level.
But then again, if they're united against him, how could he possibly win the election? Why don't they just put him in prison? So that's a question I have. Like, if they're united against him, like, this isn't no democracy. I didn't mean that YouTube. I meant YouTube. Never mind.
Well, here's the big thing.
But they seem genuinely scared that he can win, which is kind of surprising to me because I think they control the outcomes. And then they're trying to kind of Trump proofing it. Like, they're kind of, they're putting in this legislation that says, okay, if Trump wins, he won't be able to undo this, which is to
quit NATO.
We don't like democracy. We're going to not let the voters have a choice. It's basically what that is.
Yeah.
But
what the big thing is, though, with Ukraine, so it's just like if they screw around with the bill, I mean, there's a chance. I think we have to accept there's a chance this just won't get passed at all. And then the question is, how long? What does Ukraine have left in the stockpile that they can just cling on by their fingertips? Because because I did say that I was sure the plan was to keep this game going till after the election. Wind it down in spring and summer of 2025, like they did with Afghanistan, because that was a bipartisan decision. That was an establishment decision to get out of, even though Trump took all the credit for it, tried to take all the credit for it. They were like, okay, we're done. We're going to pivot. Because Trump made the deal, that art of the deal that Trump loves to talk about. It's just you want to go? But the problem with Ukraine is that if they don't get money there soon, I mean, we're not even talking about the military side, just their economy will collapse at some point, and it's really hard to get
nobody gets paid. Yeah. Everybody,
No, I mean, I see stories saying the soldiers aren't getting paid now.
Yeah.
I mean, like Ben, the last podcast you mentioned the Dragon's Teeth story. You can't even pay for new. I mean, it's bad. So it's just like, how long is that going to go if they don't get? And now, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but the European aid package, that's over 4 years, and they haven't even dispersed that. They don't even know where it's going to come from. Am I right?
And it's not. It's not nothing, but 50 billion euros over
4 years.
Whereas I mixed them up. Maybe Melnik said, well, we need 120 billion euros each year or something like that. It's a drop in a bottomless bucket, Like, they're already dissatisfied with that, and now the US 60 is gone. So this is it's speeding up so fast.
Push fortifications they have. It's just like, where are they going to fall back to? It's going to be ugly. How close to the election are they going to want a big military collapse in Ukraine happening? Because I think at this point, if they don't get new money, I mean, it's going to happen before the election.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, I hope there was a big lag, but they didn't build like a Surovikin level line, I don't think. How long ago did they start building that? I don't think they have anything close to those types of layered fortifications that could actually.
Yeah, so you're alluding to the possibility of, you know, a real large amount of movement on the front, you know, heading west, and that could very well be a possibility. I mean, you know, we've speculated about that since the very beginning of the SMO. So, I mean, time will tell. We have been going about an hour and a half. We have one of our largest live viewing audiences ever. So I just want to thank everybody for watching us live. And I was going to wind it up because it's like, at an hour and a half now. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
I'll ask everyone, maybe Ian as well, if you want to share this one picture. It's obviously unverified, but it's going around social media. And apparently this is the party card, the membership of Mr. Zaluzhny joining the Poroshenko, the Chocolate Kings, what is it, European Solidarity or something? Yeah, his party.
European Solidarity.
So, you know, that's interesting because they can't stand Zelensky, neither can Poroshenko, neither can Klitschko, who's a member of this party. So it might be that
was February 12th. His ID is dated February 12th. So that's
true. But this is going around social media now. I can't see any obvious signs of meddling, but it could still be a fake. You know, it's just an interesting aspect now that he's not at home. He's in Germany right now signing some sort of exclusive safety agreement there, like he did with Rishi Sunak. And then off to Munich, basically.
My guess is Poroshenko would be a little bit more fascisty than
Zelensky. Chocolate King, yeah.
But so I'm not sure. Yeah, they might be a worse team than Zelensky. But you know, I guess time will tell. Maybe they'll run on a platform of friends with Russia and better relations. Who knows?
The new Arestovich program. Yeah.
Okay, I hear Slug. Spaz is probably over there somewhere.
Yes.
That wasn't from my side. Slug's right here, but she's quiet.
Okay. Yeah, he's here. You can hear his feet pattering on the floor.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the roundtable. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We will be back probably Tuesday. So we will see you then. Thank you.